In 1882, a Montana cowboy named Teddy Blue walked into a Dodge City saloon after 4 months on the trail eating nothing but beans, hardtack, and salt pork. He did not order whiskey first. He ordered oysters and celery and eggs. Those were the things he wrote later that he had not tasted and was crazy for. Number 10 on this list made customers so thirsty it was practically a weapon. Number 7 shocked every journalist who witnessed it and delighted every cowboy who ate it. And number 1, a Sunday meal that cost exactly 50 cents, was the finest food most men who rode the frontier would ever sit down to. Hollywood gave you gunfights and whiskey. The real saloon gave you something stranger, saltier, and far more interesting. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 15 forgotten foods actually served in Wild West saloons. Number 15. The free lunch counter. The meal that was never free. Walk into any saloon in Dodge City, Tombstone, or Abilene between 1870 and 1900, and you would find a table at the back covered with food. No charge. Help yourself. The catch was you had to buy 2 drinks first, at 15 cents each. Saloon keepers understood something fundamental about human appetite. Salt makes men thirsty. So everything on that table was salted within an inch of its life. Pretzels, smoked herring, pickled meats, dill pickles, hard cheese. Eat the food, buy the whiskey. Buy the whiskey, eat more food. The New York Times reported in 1875 that in New Orleans alone, thousands of men ate their only daily meal entirely from saloon-free lunch counters. It was not charity. It was the most sophisticated marketing scheme the frontier ever produced. Number 14. Pork and beans. The dish that built the West. An 1886 recipe from the San Francisco Hotel Gazette described it simply: navy beans, molasses, and salt pork, slow baked until the pot turned thick and dark and sweet. That was the entire formula. Saloons made it in enormous batches because it cost almost nothing and kept without refrigeration for days. It appeared on every free lunch counter from Kansas to California. Cowboys who had eaten trail beans for months found the molasses version almost luxurious. One observer recorded bowls of baked beans placed in the center of soiled tablecloths, with forks soaking in a glass of grimy water shared by everyone at the table. Unsanitary, popular. Not one man walked away from the counter without a bowl. Number 13. Pickled eggs. The preservation trick nobody photographs. Before refrigeration reached the frontier, a bartender with a large glass jar, a gallon of vinegar, and a dozen eggs had a protein source that survived weeks on the counter without spoiling. A dozen eggs cost about 12 cents at frontier trading posts in the 1870s. Pickled in brine, they lasted indefinitely and required nothing beyond a jar and patience. They sat in their cloudy brine at the end of the bar, pale and slightly rubbery, smelling of vinegar and something older. Cowboys ate them in 2 bites. The acidity kept them preserved, and the salt kept the whiskey sales moving. You will not find pickled eggs in any Western movie. You will find them in every historical account of what saloons smelled like. They were not glamorous. They were everywhere. Number 12. Smoked herring. The fish. Nobody expected 1,000 miles from the ocean. The railroad changed everything about what a saloon could serve. By the 1870s, smoked herring packed in wooden crates was traveling by rail from East Coast ports to frontier towns that had never seen the ocean. It cost almost nothing per pound and lasted indefinitely without refrigeration. Saloon keepers laid it out on the free lunch counter alongside the pretzels and the cheese. Cowboys who had ridden in from months on the range stood at a bar in Abilene or Cheyenne eating preserved fish from the Atlantic, washed down with frontier whiskey. It tasted sharp, smoky, and intensely salty. Nobody complained. Salt was the point. Salt was always the point. Number 11. Hard-boiled eggs. The original bar snack. Simple. A pot of boiling water, a dozen eggs, 20 minutes. Hard-boiled eggs sat in bowls on saloon counters across the West and required no preparation beyond what any bartender could manage between pours. They cost about 2 cents each to produce in the 1870s. They kept for days at room temperature in the dry frontier air. A cowboy who had not tasted an egg in 4 months grabbed 2 without asking. Teddy Blue, the Montana cowboy whose trail memoirs documented the 1880s cattle trade, named eggs specifically as the first thing a cowpuncher craved when he hit town after a long drive. Not steak, not whiskey, eggs. Because eggs were the thing the trail never had. First pattern break. Here is what the movies never explain about the Wild West Saloon. It was not primarily a place to drink. It was the only public space most frontier towns had. The saloon was where you got your mail, heard the news, found work, settled disputes, and, in the absence of any hotel, sometimes slept on the floor. Food was part of that function. The free lunch counter fed men who had no other option. Miners between shifts, drifters between jobs, cowboys between cattle drives. In Chicago alone by the 1890s, historians estimate that saloon free lunches were feeding 60,000 people a day, more than all the city's churches and charities combined. The saloon did not romanticize poverty. It just fed it. Without ceremony, without credit, and without asking anyone's name. Number 10. Salted pretzels and crackers. The weapon disguised as a snack. A pretzel costs nothing to produce. A cracker costs less. Salted heavily and placed in front of a thirsty man, both cost the customer considerably more than he planned to spend. Pretzels and salted crackers were on every free lunch counter in every saloon in America by 1880, for one reason that had nothing to do with generosity. Frontier whiskey was 15 cents a shot. Beer was a nickel. A man who ate 3 salted pretzels would drink 4 beers to wash them down. The math was understood by every saloon keeper and ignored by every cowboy who reached for another handful. It was the oldest trick in the business. It still works. Number 9. Yellow cheese and cold cuts. The closest thing to a deli counter in the desert. Pressed yellow cheese traveled well in dry climates and required no refrigeration. Cold cuts, cured meats sliced thin and laid on platters, kept for days behind a bar where the temperature was cool enough. Together they formed the foundation of every respectable saloon's free lunch spread. By the 1880s, premier saloons in Tombstone, Denver, and San Francisco offered cold-cut spreads that a New York deli would not have been embarrassed by. Establishments like Tombstone's Occidental Saloon were serving Sunday dinners that included multiple meats, sauces, and imported cheeses for 50 cents a plate. That was a fortune on the frontier. Men paid it without hesitation. Because cheese and cured meat, after months of beans and salt pork, were not food. It was civilization. Number 8. Pickled pig's feet, the item that cleared half the bar. A jar of pickled pig's feet on a saloon counter sorted the room immediately. Men who had grown up poor in the South or the rural Midwest reached for one without ceremony. Everyone else pushed further down the bar. Pig's feet sold for about 3 cents a pound at frontier butchers in the 1870s, which made them the cheapest protein on the free lunch counter by a distance. Cured in brine for weeks, they were dense with collagen, sharp with vinegar, and practical in a way that did not apologize for itself. Number 7. Prairie oysters. The delicacy that shocked every journalist who witnessed it. Spring roundup meant branding season. Branding season meant castration of young bulls. And castration meant that experienced cooks and saloon kitchens received a seasonal ingredient that no menu in New York or Chicago would ever list, but that every cowboy considered a genuine delicacy. Calf testicles, peeled, sliced thin, dredged in flour, and fried fast in hot lard until golden. The flavor was mild, almost sweet. The texture surprised first-timers. Eastern journalists who rode into cattle country in the 1880s documented their shock at watching sun-weathered cowboys eat prairie oysters with the enthusiasm other men reserved for Sunday roast. The cowboys were not performing. They understood that wasting any part of an animal was simply not done. And they understood that what the journalists called revolting, they called the best thing that had come through the kitchen all week. Second pattern break. Here is what nobody talks about when they talk about the Wild West. The frontier was not a place of abundance. It was a place of radical scarcity, punctuated by sudden excess. A cowboy who arrived in town after months on the trail had money in his pocket and no experience spending it. He ate oysters because he had not tasted them. He ate eggs because the trail had none. The saloon understood this rhythm better than any other institution on the frontier. It stocked what men had been without. It salted what it needed to sell. The history books remember the gunfights. The saloon remembered what everyone was hungry for. Number 6. Canned oysters. The luxury that arrived by rail. Real oysters, not prairie oysters, actual bivalves from the Pacific or Atlantic coasts, began arriving in frontier towns in the early 1870s, packed in cans sealed with salt water. The railroad made it possible. By the 1880s, canned oysters were appearing on saloon menus from Abilene to Virginia City, transported over 1,000 miles from the coast at a price that made them a luxury no cowboy could justify, and every cowboy ordered first. Not because they were practical, because they were the opposite of practical. Because after 4 months of necessity, a man needed one thing that was purely, pointlessly luxurious. A tin of oysters in Dodge City was that thing. Number 5. Sourdough biscuits. The one item every saloon kitchen could reliably produce. The sourdough starter that lived in the back of every frontier kitchen was more carefully tended than most relationships on the frontier. It was alive. It needed feeding. A skilled saloon cook could bake 60 biscuits from a single starter in under an hour, at a cost of almost nothing beyond flour and time. They came out tangy, flaky, and hot, and they mopped up the grease from everything else on the plate. Cowboys who had eaten trail biscuits from a Dutch oven buried in coals, when they ate saloon sourdough, understood the difference immediately. One tasted like survival, the other tasted like someone had actually tried. Number 4. Frontier steak. The most complained about meal in the American West. Beef was everywhere on the frontier. Good beef was another matter. Saloon steaks in the 1870s were universally described by travelers as overcooked, tough as saddle leather, and served with the confidence of a man who had no competition for 50 miles. One English traveler recorded his steak as arriving gray throughout and resistant to every knife on the table. He ate every bite. There was nothing else. Cowboys complained about saloon steak constantly. They ordered another. The men who drove 30 million head of longhorn across 2,000 miles of plains could rarely afford the good cuts. They got what was left. They were grateful anyway. Number 3. Rattlesnake meat. The item that separated the locals from everyone else. It was said to taste like the white meat of chicken. In Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Texas, it appeared on saloon menus often enough that it stopped being remarkable to anyone who had been there more than a season. You skinned it, cut it into sections, dredged it in cornmeal, and fried it in the same lard that cooked everything else. The meat was mild and dense along the spine. In a part of the country where protein was precious and waste was unthinkable, a rattlesnake that had crossed the wrong man's path became supper. That was the whole philosophy of frontier cooking in one transaction. Third pattern break. Here is what the free lunch counter actually meant. A cowboy who walked into a saloon in 1880 with $2 in his pocket could eat for an entire day at the free lunch counter if he nursed his drinks carefully. He could get news from men who had come from 100 miles in any direction. He could find work, find a bed, find out which trail boss was hiring and which one paid late. The saloon was not the dark place that temperance reformers described. It was the only institution the frontier produced that was genuinely open to any man who walked through the door. No church membership required. No letter of introduction, no clean clothes, just the price of a drink and a plate of salted food that nobody would remember 50 years later. But that kept them going one more day. Number 2. Bear sign. The treat that made men work faster. When word spread through a saloon that the kitchen had made bear sign, the room changed. Bear sign were frontier donuts, rounds of sweetened dough dropped into hot lard until they puffed golden and were rolled in sugar while still warm. They required time, patience, and more lard than most kitchens wanted to spare, which is why they were rare. Which is why, when they appeared, men ate them standing at the counter without speaking, the way men eat something they know will not last. The name came from the shape, round and brown, or perhaps from the excitement they generated, as rare and welcome as bear tracks on an empty trail. A frontier saloon that served bear sign on a Saturday night had a full house until closing. Sugar was the scarcest thing on the frontier. Sweetness was the thing every man had been without the longest. Number 1, the Sunday saloon dinner. The finest meal the frontier could offer. 50 cents. That was the price of a Sunday dinner at a premier saloon in Tombstone, Dodge City, or Denver in the 1880s. For 50 cents, you got a printed menu. Actual furniture that had not been nailed together that morning. Multiple courses, imported cheeses, seafood shipped by rail, sauces made by a cook who had trained somewhere that had cooking schools. The Occidental Saloon in Tombstone advertised Sunday dinners that included roast meats, fresh vegetables, desserts, and wines that would not have been out of place in a Chicago restaurant. These were not common. They were aspirational. They were the reason a cowboy endured 4 months of trail beans and salt pork without quitting. Not the gunfight, not the whiskey. The knowledge that somewhere at the end of the drive, a man could sit down at a table with a cloth on it and eat a meal that cost 50 cents and felt like a fortune. That was the promise of the frontier saloon. Not lawlessness, not violence. The possibility of one good meal at the end of a very hard road. Here is the challenge. Make a pot of pork and beans this week, the 1886 way. Use navy beans, molasses, and salt pork, and bake low for 3 hours. Then tell me in the comments if it tastes like something you would have ridden 50 miles for. I want to know if anyone is brave enough to try the Prairie oysters. They are still made the same way, and they are still exactly as mild and surprising as every cowboy said they were. If you have ever been to a bar that still serves a free lunch, drop the name in the comments. That tradition started here, in dust and salt, and it was the oldest marketing trick in American history. These were not just meals, they were the civilization that the frontier built one plate at a time, and that is worth remembering.